Welcome to the South Bay Midweek Prayer and Bible Study. I know you're going to enjoy today's presentation. The live session is even better because we pray together at the beginning. Now sit back and enjoy some spiritual refreshment.
I have heard a great deal about your church. Pastor Anderson with a group has been out to see us at our Living Hope Pastors Retreat Center. We had a wonderful time with him. And I want to share with you tonight, first, a biblical base for my comments. And I'll tell you a little bit about the loving ministry of Christ that's taking place in Eastern Europe right now as kind of a foundation for the work of Elder John Tindall. But the biblical base is this. I have recently been looking for connections in the Gospels and connections between stories. So, for example, rather than study one parable, take a look at all the parables that have to do with seed in the kingdom of God. Rather than studying one parable in Luke 15 about the lost sheep, look at the three parables about lost sheep, lost coin, lost boy. Something I discovered recently that has been a great blessing to me that really summarizes the ministry of Christ is that in Matthew chapter 8 and Matthew chapter 9, there are 9 straight miracles, one miracle after the other, 9 miracles. They are set in settings of 3. And once you understand those, what I would call the triad of miracles, it really impacts your life and your ministry and helps you broaden your understanding of the ministry of Christ. So the first 3 miracles in Matthew 8 are the miracle of Christ healing the leper, the miracle of Jesus healing a centurion's servant, and the miracle of Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law. So what are those 3 miracles? What's the common theme? And what does it say about Jesus? Well, the leper is an outcast. He must cry, unclean, unclean. The centurion is an enemy. The Jews hated the centurions. And Peter's mother-in-law was a woman who had no status in society. The common theme in those 3 miracles is that Jesus ministers to the marginalized, those that society rejects, those that have no status in society, those who we can call enemies, those who are outcasts. So Jesus ministers to the disadvantaged. He ministers to the marginalized. What lesson is that for you and for me? The lesson is very simple. Look in your church congregation for the people on the fringes. Look in your church congregation for the people who may not feel socially accepted in that congregation. Look for the people that are just on the edges and about ready to leave the church. The ministry of Christ is the ministry to those who may be called outcasts or enemies or on the marginalized part of society. The next 3 miracles have also a theme. Jesus calms the storm. It's the worst storm those disciples ever were in. Secondly, Jesus heals a demoniac. Thirdly, Jesus heals a woman that has the issue of blood. When you look at those 3 miracles, what are they actually saying? In the storm, it's the worst disaster the disciples ever faced. In the demon possession, it's the worst demonic possession that they've ever experienced. And it's the worst disease of a hopeless woman who, for 12 years, searched for physicians and got worse. So what do those 3 miracles tell us? Jesus has power over everything that troubles you from without, the worst disaster. Jesus has power over everything that troubles you from within, the worst demonic possession. Jesus has power over every disease that ever afflicts the body. So those 3 miracles illustrate that Jesus is Lord over all, that we can safely trust him, that whatever we go through in life, we can put our lives in his hands. So the first 2 miracles tell us something about Jesus. The last the first two sets of miracles tell us something about Jesus. The last set of miracles tells us about life-transforming faith. And you look at those miracles, and every one has to do something with the faith of the believer that reaches out to grasp the promises of God in its life-transforming faith. Matthew 8 and Matthew 9 tell us about what I would call to be true medical missionary work. What is true medical missionary work? How do you define that? It's not simply a doctor going to the hospital. A doctor going to work at the hospital may be a medical missionary, but they may not be. Their motivation may be simply to make more money. But true medical missionary work is the unselfish, sacrificial ministry of Christ. It's the self-sacrificial love of Jesus, the first set of miracles, that grasps the power of God, the second set of miracles, by faith, the third set of miracles. So medical missionary work is the self-sacrificial ministry of Christ. It's loving other people like Jesus loved them, and it is leading them to be in touch with his power to transform their lives and teaching them the reality of faith to grasp that power. So recently, my wife and I have come back from Europe, Poland and Hungary, and we saw there the demonstration of what I would call true medical work, medical missionary work in the loving ministry of Christ. The background of our invitation was I had just preached at I think at Deltona Church. We were baptizing the son of Leluca McRoberts. And I think, Phil, you may have been there that day. Dina, you were there. And I had just walked off the platform, and my cell phone rang, and it was the division president of Trans-European Division, Rafat Kamal, a friend for many, many years. And he said, Mark, we are in a major crisis. Our people are giving and giving and giving. They need a shot in the arm. They need a boost. Plus, the refugees that are staying in our churches need somebody that they can talk to. Could you possibly come? I've worked in those divisions for many years. I started going to Poland in 1987. So that would be over 30 years now. I started going to Hungary in 88. And I've been back in and out of those countries, know the leadership fairly well, understand the countries well. One must understand that Poland in the current war is 100% pro-Ukrainian. Budapest, Hungary leans Russian. And so you have to understand language and how to deal with the situation because it's really, really tense. So we arranged our schedule, dropped some things, and decided to go. Now, Poland has had 2.5 million refugees that have come across the border, 2.5 million. Hungary has had about 500 to 600,000. Our Adventist ADRA has serviced over 500,000 of the refugees that came across the borders. They're doing an amazing work. But we were centered in Warsaw. Our responsibility there was to work with pastors in the morning. Some of our pastors are fatigued, they're burned out. They've been listening to horror stories for the last 60, 70 days. Pastors' wives that are taking in refugees, feeding them. Our churches have become centers for refugees, not only for Seventh-day Adventists, but for non-Adventists. Many of our Adventist members have taken people into their homes. So our responsibility was to work with the pastors in the morning, visit refugees in the afternoon. We produced two major documents. My sister wrote a children's book for children going through the trauma of war and going through emotional trauma. And Lars Justinian dropped everything else he was doing, one of our outstanding artists, and did all original art for the book, didn't charge a penny for it. We had the book printed on a supporting ministry press that had the paper Springs of Life, which was another miracle story. ASI financed it. They did 70,000 copies. We did them in Hungarian, Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. Then we printed, I did a magazine for them very quickly, wrote a magazine on how to find peace in a time of conflict, about, 45 pages or something. And we illustrated that and we printed that 70,000. So we were giving those out. In the evenings in Poland, we teeny taped health programs for them. And she did them live in Hungary. And then we preached at 5:30 in English, translated into Polish. And then in second session was at 7:30. And we preached in English and translated into Ukrainian. The messages were carried via streaming, 30, 40,000 views, 30,000, I think, by the time we left, and it just keeps growing. They were going back into the Ukraine. Meeting with the refugees was a life-changing experience, certainly for me and Teeny, my wife, sitting and listening to their stories. I remember one night I met with 40 of them at one time after a meeting. We were there till almost 11 o'clock in the evening. And how do you gently lead them to tell their stories, which can be therapeutic for them? There's so much in their hearts. At first, I worked with them, read Bible passages, and gently began to lead them. And once one or two began to tell their stories, it was like a dam let loose. And I'll tell you just a few of the stories from Poland, and then we'll move to Hungary. One of the stories of a woman living in our church. Now, I should mention this. When they stay in our churches were not equipped for this. So you have these little cubicles that we've made and gotten cots from Adra, and people are sleeping all over the place. Some of our churches, not true in Warsaw, but some of our churches, they've taken the pews out, put people in cots in the sanctuary, fellowship hall, and the members are meeting at home in small groups. The love that is shown from our members. We chose not to call these people refugees, but our guests. They're our guests. They've been given to us by Christ as a guest, as a treasure. There's a pastor's wife at our Warsaw church. She takes care of them. We've had 600 refugees come through the doors of the Warsaw church by the time I left, 600. These 600 refugees, we have to feed them 3 times a day. So somebody has to make that food. You have to wash their clothing. So we had to put washer and dryer in the church. Somebody has to manage them to keep the stresses down and the tensions down. And when you do this day after day after day, and you let them tell their stories, it's amazing. So there is a woman that I met at Warsaw Church and sat down with her, and she told me this story. Her city was attacked. It was leveled. The apartment building where she was living was basically leveled. She had to go into the basement. She was in the basement for 21 days. There were 160 people crammed into the basement. They heard the rumble of the earth. They heard the bombing of the city. But she lost all consciousness of time, because when you're sitting in the dark for 21 days, you don't know if it's light or day. It was so cold that she could see her own breath. She was hungry and thirsty. People were dying in the basement. You see the dead bodies there. You try to do something with them. So imagine yourself for 3 weeks, 21 days in a dark basement. You're by yourself. You don't have friends. You don't have any family with you. You have people all around you that have huddled in that basement. Some you know, some you don't know. It's pitch black. You can't tell the time. You're hungry as anything. You're shaking. And I said to her, "What did you do?" She said, "I would go into one corner, and at night, by a little lamp, I'd read the Bible." She was an Adventist. She said, "I'd read the Bible, and people gathered around me. I read to them about Jesus. I read to them about the second coming of Christ, when war would be no more." And she said, "My corner became the corner of peace." When the Russian soldiers were pushed back from that city, when they had to retreat from that particular city, they took a number of the Ukrainians with them, and she was one. They didn't abuse her, fortunately, but they took her to Belarus, which is one of the Russian satellite countries, and she was there. But she figured out a way to get across the border, and she left there, got across the border, came to Poland, and we took her in at the Adventist church. Now, usually these refugees stay anywhere from 4 days to 2 or 3 weeks. because they're looking for relatives they can move in with. They're looking for, in this woman's instance, she had a son and daughter-in-law that lived in Brazil, and they got her air tickets, so she was going to fly out to Brazil. It's only one story. I have a number of physicians in my audience tonight, so I should tell you a physician's story. It comes from LabCorp. LabCorp, of course, is an international organization that draws your blood and gives you your blood test. LabCorp was in the Ukraine when the war started. A Seventh Adventist physician and his wife and family worked for LabCorp. And so LabCorp contacted him and said, look, the war is going to be worse than we think. You have a small chance to get out right now. You got to go. So in Ukraine, the law is if you're between 18 years old and 60 years old, you cannot leave the country. You've got to stay and fight if you're a male. But if you have 3 children, you can leave with your children. So this physician had a wife. He has a 6-month-old baby and a girl about 9 and a girl about 11. So they had to leave. But leaving is really a major problem. It's a major problem because you get involved in these, I mean, you're going by Russian tanks, cities are being blown up, you don't know if you're going to survive. Then you get in these long lines of cars that are stuck. So they got in a situation where they decided we're going to leave our car. It's no way we can make it with the car. We got to walk. It was snowing. So you imagine this woman has her baby in her arms. She's nursing the baby, but she can't nurse the baby in the freezing cold. The baby won't nurse. Her milk, she can't get it. So she's freezing. She's holding her baby. The little 9-year-old and 11-year-old are holding their hands to their dad. 7 hours they trudge. They wait in lines. She can't put her baby down because so many people are around them. They told me the story of being at one train station. So many people were rushing to get on the train. A mother had her little baby on the floor just in front of her, and the baby got trampled to death. So, I mean, horrible, horrible stories. So anyway, this mother told me, she said, my arms were breaking. I couldn't hold my baby any longer, couldn't nurse my baby. My baby is crying. Finally, they get across the border, and somebody on the other side of the border, just when they got across, had a little carriage with a little umbrella on it so when the snow wouldn't fall on the baby. And they said, here, take this, a brand new little stroller. And she said to me, Pastor Mark, it was like an angel from heaven said, I know what you need. Here is a stroller, something as simple as that. So we had many, many stories that were providential, but I saw our Adventists reaching out in love with self-sacrificial service, that they were just saying, what can we do to bless our people? Many sad stories, but many happy stories. So I should end, before I go into Elder Tindall, with 2 happy stories. 2 sisters. And these 2 sisters are in the Ukraine, but in different places. They have to leave. They don't know whether one or the other is going to make it alive. They lose all cell phone contact. They think that the other one may have been killed. They don't know, but they both get out. One is staying at a home in Budapest, and the other is staying at a home in Budapest, but they don't even know one another's there. They have no way of knowing. They're wondering, is my sister alive? Is my sister dead? But they both come to church Sabbath morning in Budapest, and they meet in the church. I mean, they're throwing their arms around one another. They're weeping. Tears are just coming down their face. Sister, I didn't know if you were alive or dead, but here you are in church. I've met, and just a thrilling, thrilling story. You have read in the news about Bucha. Bucha was the city that was next to the Ukraine where some of the most horrible atrocities happened. The city basically was leveled by tank shells. Maybe 6 to 8 major bombs went off around our college. We have a college there, beautiful campus I've visited. But the windows were blown out and the doors, but the buildings are all intact, and we've now repaired them. The Russians took over our school. Our students evacuated. But there's 2 miracles that come out of Bucha that to me are just amazing. When the Russians take over some place, they trash it. They take everything they can, computers particularly. We had our Hope Channel there. The Russians went in, they saw what was there, and they didn't take one thing. Nothing from our school was stolen. I mean, that's a miracle. You just can't explain that. Our professor at the school fled from there to Poland, and he translated for me for another group of refugees at our college. At our college, we've taken in a lot of refugees as well. And he said, Mark, can I tell my story? I said, sure. He said, I was in Busha. And he said, there were 3 ladies, and I told them at our school. And he said, look, you've got 5 minutes, pack your things. There's a small corridor. We can get out now. We got to go. So he had to go through 7 checkpoints, 7 Russian checkpoints. And he said, every one, he didn't know if it was life or death. He was going through one checkpoint, and 2 soldiers were there. They had AK-47s, and they said, stop the car, get out. So he thought he said, I'm inches from death, inches from death. Open the doors of your car. We're going to examine it. They did. Then one of the young men, 17 years old, he estimated, with his AK-47, pointed at him, said, walk around to the back of the car and open the trunk. He thought, this could be it. I could be shot. And he said, I want to say something to this young man. And he didn't plan it, but the Holy Spirit put it in his mind. And he looked at the young man, he looked him right in the eyes. He said, I just want to say one thing to you. This war is going to be over one day. And when it's over and you go home to your mother and you talk to her about the war, make your mother proud. Don't do anything that would disappoint your mom. He said the soldier looked him in the eyes and smiled and said, shut your trunk and get out of here. And he got in the car and drove away. And he told me later, he said, I had never planned that. I didn't know what to say that would touch that young soldier's heart. But God put that in my mind at that time. So the war still rages. Our church is going through, in Ukraine, as you can imagine, is going through incredible suffering. But we see in the bloodshed of war, we still see the hand of God. Now, I link those stories to the story of Elder John Tindall. Elder Tindall was a medical evangelist. When he moved into a city, he asked the question, what can I do to bless people in this city? What can I do to bring the ministry of Christ here? Tindall's story is really a fascinating one. He had a very broad background, which many are unaware of. He spent a lot of time as a newspaper reporter, and not reporter, but editor, working with newspapers. It's one of the reasons he was able to contact newspapers throughout his medical missionary work and his evangelistic work and really get great articles in the paper. And I'll tell you some of those stories. He also studied at law school, never graduated, never became an official lawyer, but he knew law very, very well. Just a brilliant mind, had little interest in faith and religion. And he traced that back to a time in his home where a close loved one died, and he went to a funeral, and the preacher at the funeral talked about everlasting hell. And he rejected Christianity. He wouldn't say he was an atheist, but he was sure an agnostic. He was a very deep agnostic. God may exist, but he probably doesn't, was his attitude. He said he got the gold fever. He was down in San Diego, and there was a discovery of gold out by the Mexican border by some of the mountains. And if those of you that know the geography of California know that San Diego is almost on the Mexican border. So he went up to a place not far from there, Julian, in that area, where they were panning for gold. When he went up with a friend, and the friend said, look, there's a cabin, and there's an old man who stays in the cabin that's a miner, and he has given us permission to stay with him. But I got to tell you something about this old man. He's strange. He's really weird. Doesn't eat any meat. He's a vegetarian. He's even weirder than that. He goes to church on Saturday, doesn't go on Sunday. He has all these strange ideas, but he's going to let us stay in his place. So Elder Tindall, young man, said, well, if we get free lodging, why not? We'll go out and pan for gold. So fine, they decided to do that. So they went up and stayed with this miner. And the miner would talk to Elder Tindall. but he was reading Desire of Ages a lot out loud because, in those days, we don't have media like we do today. We don't have television and radio. And so he'd read Desire of Ages, and he was reading the chapter on the cross and crucifixion. And it just broke Elder Tindall's heart. It just moved him so incredibly deeply that he said he had never heard anything like that on the love of God. And this miner kept talking to him, gave him some mini Bible studies. That led to further Bible studies when Elder Tindall left there. But he tributes that old man as the agency that God used to bring him to Christ. He had never heard of Loma Linda, and somebody suggested he go out there and take the medical missionary course. And he became interested in this self-sacrificial service. So he went to Loma Linda and took the medical missionary course. And when I left Loma Linda for a few years, then he went back in 1909. And on February 27, 1910, Ellen White had a vision. And in her vision, she said she saw in that vision that Seventh-day Adventists should do a different type of evangelism than the world is doing. And that there should be teams organized to work in our major cities. And on these teams, there should be medical workers, physicians, nurses, co-porters. There should be Bible workers. There should be people that could organize for the team. And at that time, Elder Roderick Owen and Elder Burden Elder Burden was the business manager and Roderick Owen was the Bible teacher. And Ellen White said he was one of the most outstanding Bible teachers we had. They came to Elder Tindall, who was taking the medical missionary course, and they said, would you be willing to demonstrate Ellen White's vision? He agreed, and he went out to San Bernardino to have an evangelistic meeting there, just a short one of 6 weeks. And they would do medical work and they would do health work and combine everything together with the gospel. And he would preach. And he had one nurse and his wife and himself. And in 6 weeks, they baptized 16 people. That was amazing for San Bernardino because they had one of the more well-known evangelists there a year before, and they got almost nothing. And so it was very impressive. And so the conference president of Los Angeles invited Elder Tindall to come and hold meetings. And Elder Tindall said, well, now I'm to demonstrate this vision by Ellen White and include the medical. What about that? And the conference president said, well, we just want you to preach. We don't think the medical has much value. And so Elder Tindall declined going to Los Angeles. The Indiana conference called him and they said, there's a church that's closing and we have the building, but we don't have any membership in it. Would you be willing to go there? And Tindall said, sure, I'll go there. And so he went to Hartford City, Indiana. And while he was there at Hartford City, he began a series of health programs. And as God would have it, the local newspaper picked them up. And he began to write articles for the newspaper every week. And that church began to be packed, just time after time after time. When he left there, in 6 months later, he had baptized 48 people. The church was thriving. So the Indiana conference said, look, we want you now to go to Indianapolis to hold meetings. And so he came to Indianapolis to hold meetings, and his team was growing now. And so he had anywhere from 12 to 15 people on his team. And he had co-porters, he had nurses, he had pastors. And there were two financial plans that they typically did. And Elder Frazee, who was a disciple of John Tindall, and Elder J. Lee Neal, they differed. They were both disciples of Tindall, and they both differed on the financial plan. I thought you'd be interested in knowing their financial plans. One was called the Everything Common Plan. Other was called the Pro Rata Plan. Elder Frazee followed the Pro Rata Plan. J. Lee Neal followed the All Things Common Plan. In the All Things Common Plan, whatever money is gotten from anybody on the team goes to a central pot. And then you divide up expenses from that. So you might have a nurse that's working 2 days a week and she's volunteering 3. She puts her money in the pot. You might have the pastor's salary. That goes into the pot. The co-porter's money goes into the pot. That's the All Things Common Plan. Elder Frazee never liked that. He didn't like that plan because he thought it encouraged more complacency. So he liked the Pro Rata Plan. And the Pro Rata Plan was, we'll take all the expenses of the house. And you might have 2 homes, 3 homes. You might have 15 people in different homes. You take all the expenses and you divide them up among the people on the team. And everybody becomes responsible for making their own money. And so if you have a co-porter, he knows, okay, and I'm living in a house with 5 other co-porters. I know this is my expense. I've got to pay for light, heat, food, etc. So they like that. Elder Frisee really liked that because he felt it stimulated initiative. Tindall's plan was very similar to that, although there was some monetary sharing. A lot of people worked to make their own income. When he went to Indianapolis, he would have a large team, 12, 15 people. And as he was preaching, he noticed Elder Tindall noticed in his preaching, the man came in after the special music just for the sermon. He'd sit in the back, very well dressed, and he'd leave at the end of the sermon, wouldn't stay for the closing song. So Elder Tindall inquired about this man. He said, who is this man? And he learned that he was the owner of a factory, one of the largest factories in the city, very wealthy man. And so Elder Tindall began to talk to him occasionally. And the man said to Elder Tindall, well, why are you down here in this tent? Why aren't you in the best church in the city? Why aren't you at the best auditorium? And Elder Tindall said, well, if you could arrange it, I'd be more than happy to do that. And he said, well, look, I want you to meet my pastor. I go to the most prestigious, most outstanding church in the city. So why don't you meet my pastor? So Elder Tindall said, sure. So they went to meet this man's pastor. They went into this beautiful office. Elder Tindall describes it like this mahogany, on the walls, and this beautiful plush office of the pastor. Elder Tindall went in quite humbly. And he said, when they sat down, the pastor looked at him and he said to him, you're a Seventh-day Adventist, aren't you? Elder Tindall said, yes, I am. He said, but I'm not under that old law. And he railed for about a half an hour on that we're not under the law, we're under grace, and went on and on and on and on. And Tindall couldn't get a word in. So finally, when he got all through, Elder Tindall said, I just want to read you one Bible text. Would that be permissible? And I'll tell you why you feel you're not under the old law. And the pastor said, sure, read me the text. And Elder Tindall read him Romans 8, the carnal heart is enmity against the law of God. It is not subject to the law, and it cannot be. Elder Tindall, when he told me the story, said, Mark, that's when this man showed his angelic feature, but it wasn't one of the angels from heaven. He said, he got so mad that Tindall, this man that was with Tindall, this wealthy shop owner was with Tindall, got so embarrassed that he said, I think we should leave. So they left. This man with the factory, his name was Mr. Talge. And if you've gone to Southern Adventist University, there's a men's dormitory, and what's it called? Talge Hall. And where did the money come from? From Talge. And he had this huge furniture factory there in Indiana. And I'll tell you how he kept the Sabbath. He really fought on the Sabbath. Tindall told me he didn't want to keep the Sabbath. He just fought. So one day they were standing in his parking lot of this big factory, this furniture factory. And Elder Tindall says to Mr. Talge, you've heard the messages on the Sabbath. What do you think? And Talge looked at his factory and said, I have trains coming in here all the time, and my factory produces furniture. We're sending furniture out here 7 days a week. I don't think we could, shut it down on Sabbath. Tindall had that law background, so he had these piercing eyes. He was not a large man, 5 foot, maybe 6, 7 at the tallest. And he looked at Talge and he said, Talge, I have only one question to ask you. What's more important, your factory or your soul? And when you figure that out, call me and I'll come back and talk to you. And he turned around and walked away. He got about halfway across the parking lot and Talge yells out, Pastor Tindall, my soul is more important. Come back. And so Tindall came back and Talge made his decision to keep the Sabbath. And he donated large amounts of money to many of our universities, but particularly Southern, and that's how they built Talge Hall. Another story about the Talge family that I thought was quite fascinating. Mrs. Talge did not become a Seventh-day Adventist at the time of her husband. And she would go to the meetings, and she was in a meeting one day when Elder Tindall talked about the love of God and the need to minister as Christ ministered. And he talked about the need of having a treatment room built on the side of our churches. That Ellen White had counseled us that we should have treatment rooms, some kind of treatment room, some kind of health center, that we should make our churches those health centers. And they didn't know how to do it. And Elder Tindall described Christ's model of medical missionary work. He described a church where there was cooking schools and stress management and weight reduction, and a room on the side where they could also give hydrotherapy and massage. Mrs. Tauge was in the audience, and she was so impressed. She was wearing these very expensive diamond earrings and a diamond necklace. She reached up, took off her diamond earrings, took off the diamond necklace, dropped it in the offering plate, and they sold that jewelry, and that helped them to build the rooms, the treatment rooms, and the health center on the side of the church. So Elder Tindall tells marvelous stories of what God did in their life. Sometimes God would give Elder Tindall a dream, and they went to Dallas, Texas. And again, in that second meeting in Indiana, they baptized 144 people. They did the same in Milwaukee. They baptized 144. He baptized over 100 people in Oklahoma. Billy Sunday was the popular evangelist in that day, and the headlines of the newspaper came out and said the duel between Mr. Sunday and Mr. Saturday. They called Elder Tindall in the newspaper Mr. Saturday, and they said Sunday got the crowds, but Tindall got the converts. 7 Seventh-day Adventist ministers baptized 77 people, 7 at a time. And so that was one baptism. But the newspapers acknowledged that Tindall had a different kind of evangelism. But when he went to Dallas, we had one church in Dallas. It was a poor church. I mean, didn't have much of a facility at all. When I say poor church, I don't mean the members are poor, but a poor facility. And one night, Elder Tindall had a dream. And he dreamed he was fishing. And as he was fishing, the pole was bent way over, and he reeled in this huge fish, a great big fish. So he met with his team in the next morning, and he said, I had a dream last night. I dreamed I was fishing, and I dreamed I pulled in this big fish. But he said, I think we're going to catch a big fish in this meeting. We're going to catch a big fish. So they went to the health meetings. Now, I should explain how Elder Tindall did evangelism. It did vary some, but this is the general model. Sunday night, all the churches came together in the city for an evangelistic night. He preached. Tuesday night, they typically had a Bible study question and answer period. They did not have a major public meeting. Wednesday or Thursday night was totally health. That's the way Tindall did it. And so he'd have nurses do treatments. They would do, it was very sophisticated. I was interested in studying a little more detail about their cooking schools, which really fascinated me, the way he did it. What they did in their cooking schools, and I don't know if we could pull it off today because they'd have, 400 people in their cooking schools, 200 people. But he had a big team, and his nurses would be dressed beautifully in white. People, their chefs would be dressed in white, and they would demonstrate. Then they would have different booths, and people could go to the booths and get food from these booths. It was like a food fair where you could sample the different vegetarian foods. And it really went over well in those days. But on one of those nights, like that Thursday night or whatever he was doing, whatever night he did, Wednesday or Thursday, he had that dream of the fish, and he was going to catch this big, big fish. And so one night he was in this health meeting, and a meat packing man walked in, a man with who was a meat packer. And this meat packer was 300 pounds. And Tindall kind of winked, and he said to some of his team, the big fish just walked in. And so Tindall had that sense that this guy is the big fish that God wants me to work with. So he began giving him Bible studies. He began studying the Word of God with him. And that man was baptized. And I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was like $10,000 back tithe he gave. And they ended up building a new church in Dallas. They ended up baptizing over 100 people. And this was John Tindall, a man of God, a man of faith, had marvelous results for almost 30 years. He came to Virginia, held meetings. A.G. Daniels was the General Conference president when he had meetings in Virginia. He asked him to speak to all the pastors about this method of evangelism, integrating physical, mental, spiritual, building evangelistic teams. And as he did, as pastors seemed to be encouraged, but pastors really didn't buy into it very much. And when Elder Tindall was asked later in his life, because the executive committee of the union, as well as one of the General Conference committees, voted that Tindall's method could be a model, but he could never get pastors who really fully understood medical missionary work. And it was hard for them to get physicians who would dedicate their whole life to this. So the issue was not the philosophy. The issue was not belief in gospel medical missionary work. The issue was enlisting personnel who were willing to make that kind of life commitment. And, you know, for 55 years, I met Elder Tindall when he was in his 90s. Of course, I worked with Elder Frazee for almost 3 years, and we were friends for many, many years. But Elder Tindall I met in his 90s, and he still had his sharp mind. I remember walking with him one day. I was young. I was in my mid-20s. And Elder Tindall and I walked, and he would quiz me on the Bible. And I remember, I'll never forget one experience I had with him. He quizzed me on Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. He said to me, Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. What is that? And I gave him some lame answer. It was really a lame answer. And he looked at me and he said, you better get that better than that. He said, do you know someday you're going to be in the star chamber? I said, Elder, I don't know what the star chamber is. He said, that's when they take you out under the stars and interrogate you. And he said, that answer is not going to be sufficient. You go home and study it and come back tomorrow and you have a better answer. So he didn't give me the answer. So I went back and I studied and studied because I knew I was going to face him tomorrow. And I don't want to be embarrassed a second time, you know. But he very sharp, even up into his 90s, outstanding preacher, man of God. And I look back on my own life, what God has helped us to accomplish in whenever we've done in Eastern Europe, in Russia. When we went to Russia, to the Olympic Stadium, I brought 100 medical personnel with me. And we served 18,000 people in a massive health fair that we did. We drew blood in Russia. We had a team with us. We would have every single night, we had different health meetings. So we've tried in a feeble way, a humble way, to follow the model of Elder Tindall. But I think the big challenge today is find pastors who really have immersed their mind in books like Ministry of Healing, Medical Ministry, Counsels on Health, Counsels on Diets and Foods, and find pastors who have really immersed themselves, who understand the concept. I don't think we have to do exactly like Elder Tindall did. I think the times have changed some, but I think we can take the principles that he operated on. I think principles are eternal and they're universal. And I think we can take those principles of gospel medical missionary work and present them to a church. I know here in our church at Living Hope, before COVID, we've been going now 5 years in the church we planted, and we started with 44 people, and we have about 200 now and 18 members. We've had 700 to 900 people walk through the doors of our health programs and our Bible programs. And before COVID, each Monday night, we'd have some kind of health program going most of the year. Exercise class, stress management class, nutrition class. Attendance is from 25 to 100 in the classes. Every Tuesday night, we'd have some Bible class. Wednesday night, we had prayer meeting. And but you say, doesn't that wear your people out? Well, not everybody comes to everything. What we told our people is, look, just come out one night a week. That's all. You choose the night you want to come. You want to come to prayer meeting, great. If you can come more, fine. But at least other than Sabbath morning, dedicate one night a week. So some would come to the health programs. I might get 15, 20 Adventists to the health programs. I might get 25 non-Adventists. They bond together. Then the people who came to the health programs, they then would come, some of the non-Adventists would come to the Bible classes. And so we've had 700 non-Adventists come through the doors, about 200 Adventists. And our whole philosophy was not to lead those people prematurely to baptism, but was get them to attend church. So our whole goal was the people that are coming in the evenings, we want them to get to come to church Sabbath morning. And so we've tried on a local church level, on a public evangelism level, to try to integrate this physical, mental, spiritual healing, because we really believe that it can impact societies. I can tell you stories about Africa where whole nations have been impacted with our health message. When you integrate it, physical, mental, spiritual, it's not simply health, but you integrate it. Stories about the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. But you may have some questions about Elder Tindall's ministry, about some of the things that he did. A great man of God who was blessed of God to carry out a vision that Ellen White had. And I just pray that local congregations will carry that vision out, an integrated vision of physical, mental, spiritual wellness, because Jesus came to give us the abundant life. And Seventh-day Adventists, in the light of the great controversy, have the unique opportunity to minister like Jesus did. And our churches can become places of health, places of healing, and centers of his grace. So I'll give you some time. We've got a few minutes left. Any questions that you have about this kind of ministry?
Thank you, Elder Finley. We certainly were blessed, and we will open up the floor to questions. And you can either raise your hand in the chat, or I'm going to try and kind of gallery view here and see if anybody has their hand raised. Okay, Doug, I see your hand first. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Finley, for sharing. One of the questions I have is this written down somewhere? Have you written a book about this model, or did Pastor Tindall write something down?
There are about 2 or 3 resources I can give you. Norm Gully, when he was teaching for Japan Missionary College, wrote a syllabus. It was going to be 3 syllabi, but he wrote one called Gospel Medical Evangelism. In that, he starts with the Old Testament, goes into the New Testament, then he goes through the Waldensian period, and then on up into early Adventism. He spends the majority of time in this syllabus on Elder Tindall's work. You can see some amazing pictures as well of Elder Tindall's work in it. Gospel Medical Evangelism by Norm Gully.
Great, thank you.
Calvin Thresh wrote a master's degree thesis on Elder Tindall's work. That was his master's at Loma Linda. You'll get a very good summary of his work there, and you can get that online and print it out, which is helpful. Then a newer book called Zozo by Dave Fielder is very well worth reading. It integrates this in Tindall's work. I don't know if it mentions Tindall's work, but on gospel, medical, and missionary work too. Another good book on gospel, medical, missionary work is a book that Bob Spangler and Dwayne McFarland wrote called Healthy, Happy, and Holy. That's a real good book. Some of these books are out of print, but you can get them if you just go online and look for them. You should be able to find them. So those would be 4 resources that I would recommend that I think would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Put at least one of those up there in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That's very helpful. Thank you.
And kind of along the same lines, I just appreciate how you shared. As you received from somebody from experience, as you were learning, it's always good to hear the stories of how people are basically sharing what they've learned with other people. And that's what we're supposed to do, disciple one another. So really appreciate it.
Exactly. There's a great text. Let's see if I can put my finger on it in Timothy that I just love that's right on that point. Paul's writing to young Timothy, and here it is. 2 Timothy chapter 2. So Paul's in prison. He's an old man now. He's about ready to end his ministry. And this second verse has been really a model for me. It says, "Thou therefore, my son," so he's writing to Timothy, "be strong in the grace that's in Christ Jesus." Now notice verse 2. "The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." Isn't that great? He says, Paul writes to Timothy, and he says, "Look, the things you learn from me, you teach other faithful people so they can teach other people also." So I believe that every one of us, if you're an elder, you ought to be mentoring somebody. If you're a deaconess, you should be mentoring somebody. The way I look at it is this: you can inspire many people, but you can mentor only a few. You can inspire many, but you can mentor only a few. I have about 4 people now that I'm pouring my life into. Because you got to spend time with them, you're on the phone with them, you're in Zoom calls with them. I have one I've just started with. He's one of the conference evangelists, and I spent 3 hours with him the other day. Every 3 months, we set up a period of time, and he asked me questions, and so forth. But I love Peter's counsel to Timothy, and every one of us can be a mentor to somebody. You can be a mentor to a teenager in your church. You can be a mentor to another physician. You can be a mentor to a pastor. So there's so many different ways that we can mentor others. And I think that your point, Jim, is so well taken, that God calls us to pass on what we have learned to others.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Pastor Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Pastor Finley. I really enjoyed your presentation this evening. Enjoyed hearing about what's going on in Europe, and also Tindall's life. I wish we could hear more. I wish we could do this next week, but I know your schedule's very busy. You had mentioned what they did on their Monday night meetings. I was trying to type and I missed that one. So if you could tell me what they did on Monday, and then also how long were their meetings? Were they 3-4 weeks or something more extensive?
They were much more extensive. Elder Tindall would move into a city, spend at least 12 months in the city. He would rent homes there, and they would have more than one home, typically, that have at least 12 to 15 people. And his model was usually preaching on Sunday nights. And then on Tuesday night, he'd follow up with a Bible question and answer period on the topic of Sunday night. So if he preached, say, on the state of the dead on Sunday night, he would then come back and maybe do something on the rich man and Lazarus and some of the objections and let people ask questions. It was a smaller meeting. Then one other night a week, it could be Wednesday in some cities or Thursday, depending on the venue, he would have a major health night that night. It could have been a cooking school. It could have been a lecture. That was his model. Our model here at Living Hope for many, many months was Monday nights were a health night. And on that health night, so we might do, for example, wellness course for 8 weeks. We might follow that with a stress management for 4 weeks. We might follow that with exercise class. And here's what we discovered about health ministry. I've had many pastors talk to me and lay people about health ministry, and they say, you know what? We do health ministry, but we don't see many spiritual results. There's a reason for that. The reason for it is that the wider the gap in your transition, the fewer results you're going to get. So I've had people say, look, I've had a cooking school, and then we had an evangelistic meeting and nobody came. In San Antonio, Texas, we had our cooking school, and we transferred 100 non-Adventists from the cooking school into my evangelistic meetings. So here are 4 simple points about that. Number 1, the transition becomes broader the longer time you have between your health programs and your evangelistic programs. So if you have a cooking school, say in April, an evangelistic meeting in September, the gap is too big. Secondly, if you transfer venues, it makes it more difficult. So you have to have fairly close proximity of time, same venue. Thirdly is a big one. and that's you transfer formats, and that's too big for people to bridge. So in a health program, you're typically going one night a week. Then you begin going 4 or 5 nights a week in the typical evangelistic meeting in North America. So you're asking these people that have come one night a week now to commit 5 nights a week. It's too hard for them. But there's another problem. You've been teaching them in a much low key, and you bring them into a high-powered evangelistic meeting, and they begin to put up walls. That's a problem. Another problem is you have somebody teaching a health program who they have confidence in, and you transfer them to a new face in evangelism where they don't know that person. So how do you avoid those things? The way we felt to avoid it is this. We do our health programs one night a week, and we do a Bible study one night a week. So we're one-on-one. We're not transferring to 5 nights a week. 2, we have the same people that are involved in the health be involved in the Bible study. Same team. And we commit to that period of time. Thirdly, we stay in the same venue. So by the time we are ready to transfer to what some would call the full-time evangelistic meeting, these people have already been studying the Bible quite deeply. They are already committed. They already know our team. So we feel that the gap between health and the biblical meetings is too great. And that's why you lose so many people. The other thing we believe is that, and this is where Tindall was a master, Tindall did not see a separation between health and Bible. He saw an integration. So if you look at their health meetings, they're integrating spiritual principles at the same time they're doing their health. And it's done in a very organized, systematic way. And we believe that in your health programs, you have to be weaving in spiritual principles all the time. So in our health programs, we are weaving in the principle of prayer, for example. And it's not simply you have prayer at the beginning. We're saying, look, I know some of you are struggling to integrate these principles into your lifestyle because the pull is so hard. But can I suggest that in my own life, I've found that when I'm struggling with some habit, and all of us have different habits, I found prayer really helpful. Can I give you a principle or two on prayer? So somebody's really stressed out. I found reading the Bible really helpful. I was a funny story. I had a woman who came to my meetings, and she, a number of years ago, and she she came to a Daniel seminar, really interested in prophecy. We studied the Bible with her. We baptized her. She had a husband who claimed to be an agnostic. The reason he was is because they had a child that died very young, and they called for the Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest came to their house. And when the Catholic priest came to their house, the Catholic priest asked them for money. Didn't say much about the child. And this guy said, there's nothing in faith, and he left. He was a salesman in the city of Chicago. Stressed out, really stressed, tense. So he came to a stress management seminar that I held. And in the stress management seminar, I assigned to these secular people to read. We had a little compilation, the last few chapters of Ministry of Healing. And, like a help in daily living, and that chapter, and, how to get along with others. So I said, you put this by your bed. And if you want to be relieved from stress, you read it before you go to bed at night. So his wife is now an Adventist. She's lying in bed. He's lying next to her. And he's reading this. And she looks over at him and elbows him and says, hey, I thought you were an agnostic. And that book is filled with Bible studies. I mean, I wouldn't have said this. She just blurted it out. That book is filled with Bible texts. That book is all about Jesus. He said, look, honey, just be quiet. If it helps me to relieve my stress, I don't care. And so, but that's the point. When you have these people, see, you have to assume that they're not interested in religious things. So I don't mention any religious people say to me. I say, no, I assume they are interested. I assume that God has put in every heart the desire for eternity. And so we don't overblow them. We don't take out our Bibles and preach to them. But I don't deny who I am. I don't deny that. And so we share openly principles of prayer. We share texts from the Bible when they're coming, whether it's a cooking school, but it's done not, I'm going to have a devotional ahead of time. It just comes naturally during the process of that school. And so then we shift them, we transfer them into our Bible study program. And then from there, we move them into something more complete. We've gone now in our area, because, we have 2 gated communities. We're living in a very upmarket area. We've shifted now, and we do a lot of evangelism on the weekends because the traffic is so heavy in the Washington, D.C. area. So we'll do Sabbath morning, Sabbath afternoon, Sunday night evangelism. And we'll do it. We did a series on 3 Angels Messages for 4 weekends in a row. Really went really, really well. So during COVID in our church, we baptized, I think, 25, 26 people. This year, the first few months, we baptized 7 people already. So we're finding these people, but we've got to ramp up again our health ministry and our Bible study ministry, because we've been in a kind of a low in it now, and we're reaping some things that we've sown before.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope you found today's presentation to be a blessing to you. And it's never good to keep things to yourself. It's always best to share them. So find someone that you can share what you have been blessed with others. If you enjoyed today's presentation, let us know by hitting the like button, and subscribe to this channel if you want to know when there's new presentations coming out. God bless. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.